My mom just got a bag of that, actually.
Is it good stuff? Good?
She says it's the best.
Is that the best?
She says it's the
If
best.
it is, I'll be in Washington, D.C., hopefully in the Oval Office. I'll send for popcorn, okay?
Appreciate that.
You know, I do think that several members of Congress in some of my discussions have brought up media literacy, because that is a part of what happened here. And we're going to have to figure out how we rein in our media environment so that you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation. It's one thing to have differing opinions, but it's another thing entirely to just say things that are false. And so that's something that we're looking into.
Well, you asked the question in your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, what is the Federal Reserve, and what is your answer?
Well, what it is, it's a cartel. It's not a government agency. It has the appearance of it being a government agency, and they went to great lengths to give it that facade. It does have the power of government because Congress voted to give the power of enforcement to it. But in its essence, underneath it, it's a cartel. It's nothing different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel or sugar cartel. It happens to be a banking cartel. They got together, they drew up the rules and regulations for their own industry, to self-regulate their own industry is what cartels do, and then they sent it to Congress, and they took off the label at the top that said banking cartel, and they erased that, and they said Federal Reserve Act. Congress passed it into law, and that's why we think it's a government agency, is because if you don't obey the rules that they set down for their own industry, you go to prison. And so it looks like a government agency. But basically the answer to your question is it's a banking cartel.
That Agatha is the gayest project Marvel has ever done. Agree?
I would agree with that, yeah.
Why is it?
You'll see. You'll see when you watch it. But, you know, I think witches are queer inherently just because we are outcast and, like, set aside for many reasons. And I think this show shows a really good representation of different types of people, and that we can all use the power we have within to, like, go forth and be great.
I thought when I got to be president, I'd get to do things that I wanted to do, but my staff tells me what I can't do, but I'm going to do it anyway. All the young women, young kids out there that are out there, come on up and do this when we stand behind me when we do this. Come on. And the guys. Come on. What's your name? What's your name?
This shocking discovery really representing what CBP is calling a drastic escalation in the type of weaponry being used over in Mexico. So we were able to exclusively obtain an internal alert that went out to Border Patrol. Now, this alert said that 4 rocket-propelled grenades, or RPGs, and 8 improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, were found, along with a large amount of ammunition within a scout site that was also dismantled by Mexican officials.
U.S. law enforcement should be concerned for their safety, especially along the border, because those missiles and those weapons easily come across the border. They do have the resources, and in fact, they do have the capabilities and will use them against us, especially when we go in the next couple of months, depending on what happens in this political atmosphere. They have the capabilities to fight back.
White men like Trump need to be banished. people don't really know me. Like, I'm blessed that I have the money to start this political party. I'm not gonna make no apologies for how much cake I get, you know? That has empowered me, but I know once I get it, I'm going to fund the revolution. I'm a frontliner. I'm with the smoke at any time, no matter where my address is at. We're in a war. Number one, Trump gotta go.
And then what?
Anything that's, you know, that is about oppressing us and keeping us down, nah, I want to break his neck. I want to run it out of town forever. So I'm not like, nah, this is what we doing. I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war.
In a new federal court filing, we learned that Ruth had been staking out Trump at Mar-a-Lago and at his golf course for weeks. Found the rifle with the scratched-off serial number, had a bullet in the chamber. They found 2 sets of license plates and 6 cell phones in his car. So why did Ruth have so many phones? And where did he get the fake plates? Well, we're also learning about a strange box. This box contained 4 cell phones, ammo, tools, metal material, and some pipe, and a series of handwritten letters. The FBI released a photo of what they say is the first page of Ruth's letter. The FBI says this witness took a picture of the first page of the letter, and the FBI is using this picture from a mysterious witness of a letter that we don't even know if they have custody of in a federal court filing. The FBI says Ruth was motivated to kill Trump because he believed the former president was unfit and destructive to America's moral fabric. Does that sound familiar?
Makes him unfit for public office. Not fit to serve. Donald Trump is not fit to be the job of president.
This invisible moral fabric.
So the Biden administration just released the Assassin's Manifesto that put a $150,000 bounty on Trump's head and called him unfit to serve. The same language Biden's used.
This is downright bizarre.
Joe Biden can't even stand up there and call out China, I would argue, because he's way too compromised because of the business deals of his son. But even if you put that aside, this administration has always taken a horrific America Last approach to affairs on the world stage. You can sit there and laugh, but we're as close as we've ever been to World War III. And meanwhile, quite literally yesterday, you have Zelensky touring ammunition factories in Pennsylvania, which is just a continuation of the Biden-Harris strategy that they secretly announced last year, saying that the way we're going to sell Americans on supporting the Ukraine war is by saying that more aid packages to Ukraine actually boosts the manufacturing base here in the United States, and it's good for American jobs. So nice to know that Zelensky is now a de facto surrogate for the Harris campaign, but their foreign policy approach has never been about American people. That's why it's so woefully unpopular. So when Joe Biden stands up there and forgets the Prime Minister of Modi's name, the reason why it resonates so soundly with American people is because we're tired of being lectured by the so-called elites and experts in the room, all those very same people who told us that if President Trump became president, the world, the world order, the kind of neo-globalist world order would just automatically collapse. It didn't. That's what happened. It was all projection. That's what's happened under Joe Biden.
Brian.
They were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
I want to walk our viewers through a little bit of what she said. Let's just take immigration and look at what she said here. She said on immigration, she made this open-ended pledge to end immigrant detention. She said she supported taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants. She also said she supported
taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants.
She
actually said she supported that.
She both wrote and answered in the affirmative when she was asked this. Oh. And she said she also supported it for federal prisoners. Now, she also pledged to slash immigration detention by 50%, close all family and private facilities, and decrease funding for ICE, and then the end ICE detainers with local law enforcement.
I mean, these are things that, it would be hard to think that you would come up with taxpayer funding gender transitions for detained migrants, and yet this, as you say, written and verbally.
Let me give you some examples of McDonald's French fries. In the U.S., there's 11 ingredients. In the U.K., there's 3, and salt is optional. An ingredient called dimethylpolysiloxane is an ingredient preserved with formaldehyde, a neurotoxin, in the U.S. version. This is used as a foaming agent so they don't have to replace the oil that often, making McDonald's more money here in the United States. But they don't do that across the pond. This is Skittles. Notice the long list of ingredient differences. 10 artificial dyes in the US version and titanium dioxide. This ingredient is banned in Europe because it can cause DNA damage. Artificial dyes are made from petroleum, and products containing these dyes require a warning label in Europe that states it may cause adverse effects on activity and detention in children. And they have been linked to cancer and disruptions in the immune system. This on the screen back here is Gatorade. In the US, they use red 40 and caramel color. In Germany, they don't. They use carrot and sweet potatoes to color their Gatorade. General Mills is definitely playing some tricks on us. They launched a new version of Trix just recently in Australia. It has no dyes. They even advertise that, when the US version still does. This is why I became a food activist. My name is Vani Hari, and I only want one thing. I want Americans to be treated the same way as citizens in other countries by our own American company.
I'll tell you something interesting that happened today, and I actually was going to mention this to Rand, because it was an extraordinary event to me. But Robert Redfield, who I really go after in my Fauci book, kind of a hammer and tongs, wrote an editorial in Newsweek magazine today saying that he was endorsing President Trump because President Trump was going to restore American health, and that President Trump, he said, a lot of people might surprise me to see this, but hear me say this, but he has chosen exactly the only person who can do this, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This was breathtaking to me because this is the guy who's the head of the CDC that I've been criticizing for years. And then this afternoon, he came over and had lunch with me. It's the first time I've ever met him. And the first thing he said to me is, "You got everything right."
Wow. Ukraine is basically a Cold War black site with spies, weapons, traffickers, and guns for hire. Any American with a weapons of mass destruction conviction on his rap sheet who spends 8 months hanging out in the Ukrainian army barracks, recruiting Muslim fighters, and buying drones from Eastern European arms dealers has to be picked up for questioning when he returns home. Ruth checks all those boxes. He was identified to the State Department by a former CIA agent and to Homeland Security by an American nurse. The nurse flagged Ruth twice to the Biden administration.
I determined after knowing Ryan for a while that he was a threat to others. It was necessary that he be reported to the proper authorities.
Ruth was flagged to the Biden administration a third time when he returned to Hawaii. Customs agents told Homeland Security to look into him, and Mayorkas dropped the investigation. Subpoena all of the documents because Ruth was all over the Biden administration's radar. Meanwhile, Ruth's son is now in custody. The FBI arresting Orrin Ruth for possession of child pornography.
I was talking to someone the other day who's not conservative who said to me off camera, you know, the chemicals in our water, for example, are changing the sex of frogs. And I didn't want to be mean. But I did say, are you telling me they're turning the frogs gay? And this person didn't get the reference at all and goes, yeah, that's basically right.
You need to research how evil your enemy is, because to defeat your enemy, you got to know who your enemy is, and your enemy is the globalist, transhumanist, New World Order.
So I wonder, I agree with that. So what you're saying, I mean, you've just risen right above American politics, even global politics, and you're addressing the deep forces that control things. I wonder, Jack, since you do cover American politics, are there any politicians who are seeing what's going on right now in terms that big?
There is one guy, but I wouldn't call him a politician. His name's Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
What he says is the opposite. It's just another lie. Like, how did we get here? Let's extinguish him for good. We have an answer. We have a remarkably talented candidate who is sincere, who's pragmatic, who's open. Let's just get it done.
I would just say the spate of polls that came out yesterday, Quinnipiac, our CNN polling, the Gallup poll indicators right now, the Nervous campaign this morning is the Harris campaign. They're not where they need to be with young voters. They're not where they need to be with voters of color, working class voters. They're not achieving the margins that they need that Joe Biden was getting in 2020. And Trump's base is immovable. And right now, his administration and him personally are more popular than they have ever been.
We just need to move past the failed policies that we have proven don't work.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
So, at the time when COVID was being enacted, I'm going to read off the staff of who's in charge of this CDC. The director of the CDC was Rochelle Walensky, dual citizenship with Israel. She's a Jew. Deputy director of the CDC, Ann Shawalchik, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. CDC chief of staff, Sherry Berger, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. CDC chief medical officer, Mitchell Wolf, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. CDC director of the Washington office. This is pertinent to the topic. We're talking about COVID, right?
Freedom of speech.
Yeah, this is pertinent to COVID. So, I love you, Jennifer.
Doesn't make it bad. Let him speak.
Yeah, please. So, director of the CDC of the Washington office, Jeff Resnick, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. COVID czar, Jeff Zaints, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. COVID senior advisor, Andy Slavitt, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. Assistant of Health Secretary for Human Services for our country, the Assistant of Health Secretary, Rachel Levine, transgender, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew.
I'm going to ask that you hold off, Christopher. And assistance to state and local governments around transit dollars. And looking holistically at the connection between that and housing. And looking holistically at the incentives we in the federal government can create for local and state governments to actually engage in planning in a holistic manner that includes prioritizing affordable housing.
We are having these hearings so that you become immune. You become inured to the notion of the removal of the FBI and DOJ, so that those agencies are no longer there to serve as a check against white nationalism, great replacement theorists, Christian nationalists, white fragility, fascists, and the twice impeached convicted felon, former president and would-be dictator, Donald Trump.
Did you feel that your hand was forced, and what is your relationship with Speaker Pelosi now?
My relationship is fine. Look, I stepped down because I started thinking about it. You know, it's hard to think of, I know you're only 30, but it's hard to think of, it's hard for me to even say how old I am. And as vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do. And so I was able to delegate her responsibility on everything from foreign policy to domestic policy.
Harris previously called Donald Trump's wall project a complete waste of taxpayer money that won't make us any safer. Where does she stand on the wall?
She wants to make sure that the border is secure, and there are lots of measures to be able to do that, and the funding is necessary to make that happen, whether it's using technology. There may be provisions where she needs, but his version of the wall was ridiculous. She wants to do it in a way that actually has impact and actually slows illegal immigration while making sure it's done in a sensitive way. So, you know, the bottom line is he is utterly hypocritical about it, and she will definitely point that out.
Expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share. I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share. And it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax.
And how do you find that line to make sure corporations are paying their fair share, but they're not leaving our country?
Well, listen, I work with a lot of CEOs. I have spent a lot of time with CEOs, and I'm going to tell you that the business leaders who are actually part of the engine of America's economy agree that people should pay their fair share. They also agree that when we look at a plan such as mine that is about investing in the middle class, investing in new industries, investing in bringing down costs, invest in entrepreneurs like small businesses, that the overall economy is stronger and everyone benefits.
She doesn't answer the question. Expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, Where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share.
And she says, we just have to do it. And that's great, and that's a campaign promise.
I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share, and it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax.
She doesn't answer the question, but how do you find that line to make sure corporations are paying their fair share, but they're not leaving our country?
Well, listen, I work with a lot of CEOs. I have spent a lot of time with CEOs, and I'm going to tell you that the business leaders who are actually part of the engine of America's economy.
She doesn't answer the question.
Agree that people should pay their fair share. They also agree that when we look at a plan such as mine that is about investing in the middle class, investing in new industries, investing in bringing down costs, invest in entrepreneurs like small businesses, that the overall economy is stronger and everyone benefits.
If it means we're just going to borrow again, then what we're doing is we're just never addressing the deficit. And back in the days when you were a proud Republican, debts and deficits mattered.
He still jokes about Paul Pelosi nearly being beaten to death. He thinks that's funny. Let's see what else. He hinted that the Second Amendment people could do something against Hillary Clinton. And he is calling for a televised military tribunal for Liz Cheney. These are his past statements and ideas. He's blamed now, but now he's blaming rhetoric from you, that you inspired these two assassination attempts. After all of the calls for violence, you know, take them out, all the rest of it, you know what it is. Don't you think that that is just unbelievable? And what do you say to that?
Well, I think he is the most unusual president. No. Look, when I ran, I said I was running, one of the first major speeches I made was for Independence Hall about democracy. That democracy was at stake.
And to restore the soul of this country.
Yes, and look, Trump is
Careful.
there's not a lot of social redeeming value there.
No, you think right.
But here's the thing. He really does not believe in democracy and the guardrails that our system is set up for the abuse of power.
It'd be good for us to have a black woman as president for the first time in history. But my vote's kind of still on Trump.
Before I begin, I will say a few words about Hurricane Helene. So the president and I, of course, are monitoring the case and the situation closely, and we urge everyone who is watching at this very moment to take this storm very seriously, and please follow the guidance of your local officials. And President Biden and I, of course, will continue to work closely with state and local officials.
She doesn't answer the question. Expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share.
And she says, we just have to do it. And that's great, and that's a campaign promise.
I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share, and it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax.
She doesn't answer the question, but how do you find that line to make sure corporations are paying their fair share, but they're not leaving our country?
Well, listen, I work with a lot of CEOs. I have spent a lot of time with CEOs, and I'm going to tell you that the business leaders who are actually part of the engine of America's economy.
She doesn't answer the question.
Agree that people should pay their fair share. They also agree that
when we look at a plan such as mine that is about investing in the middle class, investing in new industries, investing in bringing down costs, invest in entrepreneurs like small businesses, that the overall economy is stronger and everyone benefits.
If it means we're just going to borrow again, then what we're doing is we're just never addressing the deficit. And back in the days when you were a proud Republican, debts and deficits mattered.
We are having these hearings so that you become immune. You become inured to the notion of the removal of the FBI and DOJ, so that those agencies are no longer there to serve as a check against white nationalism, great replacement theorists, Christian nationalists, white fragility, fascists, and the twice impeached, convicted felon, former president and would-be dictator, Donald Trump.
First of all, Latina small businesses are the fastest growing in the country.
Yes, they are.
Right?
Yes, they are.
But included in that is that we don't lack for people who have ambition and have aspirations and dreams and an idea that is a great idea and work ethic. But not everybody has access to the capital.
That's so true.
And I believe strongly that our small businesses are the backbone of America's economy. So when we grow and strengthen small businesses, we all benefit.
Larry, in my entire life of working on this issue, studying this issue, spending time with our ICE agents, our Border Patrol agents, I never, in my worst nightmare, could imagine a day when I would be sitting here talking to you about a government releasing 425,000 convicted criminal aliens into the country, including 13,000 homicide cases and 15,000 rape cases. In any other government, in any other country, it would sink that government. In Canada, in the UK, in France, in Italy, in any of those countries, a government that released half that many, a quarter that many, an eighth that many, they would all be forced to resign. And their party wouldn't be returned to power for at least a decade or more. The only reason Kamala Harris is able to even continue running after a bombshell like this is because she is protected by the legacy media. There is no defending a scandal of this magnitude.
I think it's important for us to realize that former President Trump will do whatever he thinks he can do to try to steal the election. I think that he's been very clear about that. He's been very clear about, the election is only going to be legitimate in his mind if he wins.
Millions and millions of people, 21 million plus, have been dumped into the United States, and many of them are murderers. Many of them are horrible criminals. What Kamala Harris has done is unforgivable. It's a crime, what she did. It's got to be criminal. There's no greater act of disloyalty than to extinguish the sovereignty of your own nation, and that's what she's done. She's ruined our nation. She's ruined our nation.
Do you think it's a crisis, what's happening at the border?
Well, I think it could be fixed. I think crisis is, we certainly have these. I don't want people living outside Minnesota right now. I think there's the humanity piece of this, and then there's the right that every sovereign nation has the right to control its borders, as we should. More could be done, but they're doing nothing. Congress is doing nothing. The president is asking for more aid for Border Patrol, not getting it.
But do you think the border's secure?
I think the border, with the folks who do the work down there, are doing a great job. Could we do better? Absolutely.
And I think this border trip today happened at the worst possible time for her, given the other news that came out, that her administration allowed, nearly 500,000 criminals, many of them violent criminals, to just be in the country and roaming freely, including 16,000 convicted murderers and 13,000 rapists, or maybe it was the other way around, 13,000 murders and 16,000 convicted rapists. I mean, this is something that would be ending a presidential campaign in any sane country.
People believe that the Biden-Harris administration rightly has failed them. I don't know if your viewers are familiar. The letter, the acting ICE director sent a letter to Tony Gonzalez that says, I want to get it straight here, of the 7 million illegal migrants in this country, 663,000 of them have criminal histories. 13,000 have been convicted of homicides, 16,000 of sexual assault, 1,800 still face criminal charges for homicide. These are people that ICE has detained but had to let go because of the current system. It is a huge issue in this country. Americans have had enough of it, and that's why she's there tonight. She's realized that they've broken the system, and they need to do something to try to fix it in the last 40 days. Get on the plane, Madam Vice President, go back to Washington, and do your job.
This week, we launched an initiative alongside companies and nonprofits to help improve research and understanding of how a person's online experiences are curated by automated processes. This will also be important in understanding more about mis- and disinformation online, a challenge that we must, as leaders, address.
It's a harem, okay? It's a harem. It's Trump's harem. So I always feel sorry for the 3 real judges on the court. You know, I know a lot of people have jobs, not me, not you, and you have to go to work every day, and there are people you don't like at work. But can you imagine having to go to work every day? Alito? You have to go to work with Alito, with Kavanaugh, you know. I mean, it must be horrible. So what Biden should do, not that you asked, but when they passed that law, the Supreme Court passed that ruling, you know, where they said, you're not the president, you're the king, which is what that ruling is. You can do whatever you want. You can never be, you know, held responsible. I thought, you know, Biden's still the president. No one seems to notice, but Biden should dissolve the Supreme Court.
Dissolve the Supreme Court?
I'm the president. I'm the king now, like you said, and go home.
Okay.
There are consequential issues at stake in this election, and one is the security of our border. The United States is a sovereign nation, and I believe we have a duty to set rules at our border and to enforce them. And I take that responsibility very seriously.
Every person watching this hearing who has experienced the TSA screening process, it can often be very onerous. People who have done absolutely nothing wrong are law-abiding citizens in every respect, are subject to the most invasive screenings at these airports. Yet you're allowing illegal aliens to present warrants for arrest and waving them onto airplanes. How does that make sense?
Not doing that, sir.
You just told me that you've let 1,000 people travel on airlines who present to you warrants for arrest.
Yes,
right?
sir. And they present those warrants. That warrant is the beginning of an identity verification process, which follows.
Why isn't it the end? Why isn't that the end of the process? And you say, sorry, you have a warrant for an arrest. We're not going to allow you to get on an airplane.
Because we want to identify who is presenting themselves at the screen checkpoint.
Boy, I think you're going to have a hard time explaining to folks who are randomly selected, or sometimes perhaps not so randomly selected for enhanced screenings, but you're allowing illegal aliens with warrants for arrest to get onto airplanes, and you've allowed at least 1,000 of them in this calendar year. I mean, I just find that totally extraordinary.
The United Nations is a place where the world actually gets together and talks. This is a world that increasingly people are isolated. People are focusing on what they hate or what they like. If you actually had this meeting 4 times a year as opposed to just once, you'd have more movement towards diplomacy.
You'd have more hookers.
I think it's important to remember that it takes a very short time to destroy an institution, and it takes decades to build one. And we need institutions. Otherwise, human society doesn't function.
I said we shouldn't get rid of it, but it's a fucking joke. Currently sitting on the UN Human Rights Council are China, Somalia, and Sudan. That's a joke.
That's a joke.
Okay, great. So now we're agreeing. Yeah. Terrific. From 2015 through 2022, basically last 10 years, the UN General Assembly has adopted 140 resolutions, these are scolding a country, on Israel, and 68 on all the other countries in the world.
Correct.
We're talking about Russia, Iran, Syria, Sudan, Myanmar, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Yemen, Somalia, all of those,
Bill.
and other bad boys,
Bill.
68, Israel alone, 140.
Bill, your
That's
problem.
a joke.
They overthrew the United States of America. They overthrew the constitutional republic of the United States of America. And then they covered it up with their January 6th bullshit.
This is a war that should have never happened. It should have never happened, and it wouldn't have happened. It's a shame, but this is a war that should have never happened, and we'll get it solved. It's a complicated puzzle, very complicated puzzle, but we'll get it solved, and people get on with their lives. Too many people dead.
And so we have a very good relationship. And I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
I hope we have more good relations.
We're going to have, oh, I see. Yeah, but you know, it takes two to tango, you know, and we will, we're going to have a good meeting today.
Press, thank you. Press, thank you very much. Thank you, Press. Thank you very much, Press. Please be moving.
Joe Biden became mentally impaired. Kamala was born that way. Okay? She was born that way. And if you think about it, only a mentally disabled person could have allowed this to happen to our country. Anybody would know this.
The dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. The referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. There's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. Our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
We got to make sure there's no cheating, and we're working hard on that. We got more lawyers. We got more people watching. And I told them, if we win and when we win, we're going to prosecute people that cheat on this election. And if we can, we'll go back to the last one, too, if we're allowed. But we're going to prosecute people, so at least they know that's going to happen. And I said that because we have to have strong borders. You need two things, strong borders and fair elections. And we have neither.